Hello, y'all. This is my DCEU ranking from Man of Steel to the Suicide Squad. I hope y'all enjoy, so let's just get started now. In the last spot, we have Justice League, released in 2017. So, where do we even start with this one? We got a whole shopping list of things we could go off on this movie for. Steppenwolf is a big bad for this movie, and not only is he pretty bad at being the bad guy for this movie, which he's supposed to be, he also looks very different from how he's supposed to be in BVS, which is supposed to be a sequel for. And the roided up action figure look they go for makes him look like a Thundercats villain from the 80s. Setting aside Steppenwolf's obvious personality and look difference from the Snyder Cut, the plot of this movie is relatively the same. But it's all the things of this movie, the little things, that add up, and they ain't so little anymore when you see how terrible this movie turned out. Even the music is a letdown, because Danny Elfman, a great composer who even made extraordinary DC scores, misses the mark on this one and uses themes from 40 years ago for Superman and 30 something for Batman. And those aren't the only things that are mismatched in this movie. We also had the worst implementation of reshoots I've ever seen in a movie. I mean, these bands got whole different haircuts and the lighting is completely different. This movie fails in just about every aspect, and there aren't much redeeming qualities, but there are a few scenes that I do like to watch from this movie, and I'll name them, which are the Flash and Superman racing, Aquaman having the embarrassing moment with the lasso of truth, and Batman chasing the parademon on the rooftops. And if I only want to watch the good parts of the movie, I can just see them in a clip or fast forward to those parts, but I have no desire to ever rewatch this movie again. If you just got into DC recently or are thinking about watching this movie, just save yourself from the misery, the brunch jokes, the lip, and all the bad things that come with this movie. Just skip it. At number 10 is Suicide Squad, released in 2016. So, there's no way to talk about this movie without really bringing up the potential, the Ayer cut, that I think should release, and I don't think it would really interfere with the new Suicide Squad. I don't really think the director's BSing on this one, and you can clearly see cracks of his original movie in this movie, so I'll let you guys read the tweet, and you can pause the screen for a second. When you're watching this movie, you can't help but notice the many editing mistakes. But putting aside some of the mid jokes of this movie, the biggest sin this movie does is spending nearly 50 minutes on introducing the characters. There was this whole other member that I completely forgot was in the movie. His name's like Slipknot and superpowers climbing walls and stuff. But I don't blame anyone who doesn't remember him either. But instead, what this movie will do is it takes the genius decision of showing you 3-4 times what a character is like, even though it might be in the name, like Deadshot, where they already show that he could shoot stuff good like 3 other times. This is not great for the movie's sake at all, because by over-explaining Harley Quinn being crazy, even though we can clearly see it by her look, Deadshot having the cool mask, like we know he shoots good from having the cool look, it really makes the rest of the cast suffer, because we don't know much about Killer Croc. The romantic subplot, it suffers a lot because we don't care much about it, and we don't know who Slipknot is. I know I talked about Justice League Steppenwolf earlier, but holy crap, this is the ugliest and most hideous villain design I've ever seen in a movie before. He's a terrible villain in this movie, very generic, and he has a terrible look to accompany it. I've said the first biggest sin that this movie done, so now let's get into the second. That's trying way too hard to be cool. I mean, you get Will Smith saying, "Oh, we're the bad guys," like 3-4 times again. And then you also get this random assortment of a Spotify playlist that is the soundtrack for this movie, where for some reason there's Skrillex, Kanye, Etta James, Rolling Stones, with no correlation to the scene at all. Oh, and also Eminem, of course, in the scene of Harley Quinn changing, because that correlates all the best. Although I will say this, Gangsta by Kalani and Heathens by 21 Pilots, those songs go hard, and I will not accept any slander on those two songs. As for the positives of this movie, I really like seeing the Joker and Harley Quinn relationship. It was intriguing, and it brought a lot of interest to their characters, even though that Joker was a little weird. I also thought the casting for this movie was excellent, and in some cases, dang perfect. With Viola Davis as Amanda Waller and Margot Robbie as Harley Quinn, they just embodied the characters completely. Suicide Squad 2016 is a bad movie that's saved by the cast charisma, has a pretty neat post-credits scene, and all I gotta say for the rest is release the Snyder Cut. These next three spots prove to be difficult in ranking because there's a three-way tie originally, believe it or not, between them. So you see the order that I chose them in, and so number 9, we're going Wonder Woman 84. I feel like the delays of this movie's release date has probably caused people to hate it more than they would have if it came out in its original release date, especially taking into account how well received the first one was. But I think this is a pretty decent movie all in all, but there are huge problems that have to be addressed when you're talking about it. The movie has a very similar plot to The Amazing Spider-Man 2, but even that movie has its fans, and I feel like that movie also did this type of plot better with the tragic love story and the nerd turned villain. What also can't be ignored about this movie is the very uncomfortable way that Steve is brought back into this movie, which involves a little body swap with some random dude who never consented to being with Diana, and I just know that whatever 24-year-old intern wrote that is definitely getting fired for that. This movie has a runtime of 2 hours and 30 minutes, and you definitely feel it. There's a lot of unnecessary scenes, such as the opening one with Diana doing some American Ninja Warrior sort of training course, which is unnecessary because we already saw a big chunk of the first Wonder Woman exploring memories of her younger years. There's also a lot of heavy exposition, which is terribly shown in the movie. The villains could be one note, and I also feel like neither of their stories were fleshed out enough to the potential that they could have been. I want to say this movie is mid, it feels too long, the plot is very messy, but what saves this movie and makes it watchable is the relationship between Steve and Diana, as well as the 80s vibrant aesthetic that this movie has. At number 8, I got Aquaman, released in 2018. There is a decent quality gap between the last place and this one, but I would say that this movie is good. It ain't perfect, but there are a lot of shots in this movie that definitely are, and this is one of the best looking DC movies in my opinion. I mean, just look at these gorgeous images. It gets a lot of unfair criticism for the CGI and things looking quote unquote fake in this movie, but I think for major parts of this movie taking place in underwater and how expansive they make the world look, I think it definitely overrides that criticism. The plot for this movie, it's okay and serviceable, but we did not need to see, I believe, 6 different versions of Arthur Curry in this movie, which is just unnecessary, and some of that time could have been used to develop Orm or Black Manta better, which I would say Black Manta is an alright villain. We'll see his potential in Aquaman 2, but for Orm, he's one of the best villains in the DCEU so far. And surprisingly, Orm's motive is pretty realistic, with him not liking how the ocean is being treated by mankind. But this is very weird, but okay in contrast to how ridiculous and overtop this movie is in a great way. It's unashamed of what it is, and it goes all out on the extraness and goofiness, which is amazing. This paid off in such a neat way because they risked it all with the comic book goofiness of the suits and just decided to go all out with them, and we've got some really spectacular looking suits for Black Manta and Aquaman, and they've translated surprisingly well to live action. As for the negatives, setting aside the obvious inequality surrounding the case, I don't believe that Amber Heard has the charisma to match Jason Momoa, and it results in a boring love interest. I also don't like how it feels like they're chasing a MacGuffin for a big part of the movie, with them going on the quest for the Trident, even though it does play a good part in the movie. This movie is at least good in most departments except maybe dialogue and the main love interest, but it has beautiful shots, epic action sequences, and a great wholesome love story with Aquaman's parents. This is a good first Aquaman movie, and it does the character justice very well. At number 7 is Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice Ultimate Edition, one of the most divisive films in recent memory. This movie chooses to do a realistic take on two of the most iconic comic book characters. I think for the most part it does this very well, and it was good that this movie did this because there has been other comic book properties that have done this in recent years. Unfortunately though, for Superman, I don't feel like it works because this is a person who is raised with human values, and from this movie, we were just kind of emotionally disconnected from him, apart from the scene that he has with his father, which I found pretty touching. The movie focuses way too much on Clark being this stoic god figure to humanity that it forgets who he is. And also, when they show us the vision of him in the future, of evil Superman, you can't really tell much difference because he's pretty emotionless throughout this movie. On the topic of future visions and connections to the upcoming movies, I think they were so clunkily inserted, they take away from the plot, and they allude to characters and events that we haven't even seen yet. So on the other hand, let's talk about the other dude in the title of this movie, Ben Affleck's Batman, who I think is brilliant and the best portrayal of Batman we've seen to date. Him and Jeremy Irons are a great Alfred and Bruce duo, and they play off each other very well. I also think Ben brings the gravitas that, an old, weathered Batman would have, and all of his scenes are very intriguing, and he's definitely the best part of this movie. I'm definitely not the first or last to have this problem with the portrayal. My only gripe is Batman killing, of course. Now that brings us to our big bad, Jesse Eisenberg's Lex Luthor, who reminds me a little bit too much of a Nolan Batman villain, which is not a good thing in this case. He speaks in pretentious quotes, and I can't help but compare him to Paul Dano's Riddler, who I felt was what was supposed to be the better version of this character, because at least he had self-awareness, and in this movie they want you to treat Lex Luthor 100% serious. The plot can be kind of messy, and it feels like two separate movies. A Doomsday movie tacked on at the end, and a Batman v Superman movie, and unfortunately the fight that they have is kind of underwhelming, and I wish there was another fight that they had beforehand. But I do enjoy the confrontations that they have at the gala, and Clark investigating about who the Batman is in Gotham. Those scenes are very interesting. Mentioning fights, the Batman warehouse scene is one of the best fight scenes in a comic book movie. The Doomsday one is also very good, and it has an epic feel around it, and it's just a total adrenaline rush throughout it. You could never really go wrong with the Hans Zimmer score, and he really delivered on this movie, with one of the tracks even appearing in the Wonder Woman 84 movie. Wonder Woman didn't have a crazy amount to do in this movie other than the fantastic Doomsday fight scene, but the theme that Hans Zimmer wrote for her is also amazing, and it's one of the most memorable I've heard. Whether you think this movie is a masterpiece or the worst thing man created, there's always some engaging discussions to be had about this movie. I think that when this movie is good, it's dang near perfect, but at its bad moments, it can be a bit convoluted and even boring at times. But it's definitely one you should watch because it's very divisive and you might end up loving it. At number 6 is Birds of Prey and the ridiculously long title, which should have just been called the Harley Quinn movie, but we'll get into that in a bit. Taking aside what I said about the title, This movie is good, and it even has a few things that make it great. It's a shame how the off-screen politics of this movie really resulted in less people seeing this movie than they probably would have, because it's not as woke as you might think so from some of the actors' unnecessary comments and the media's hype around it. It clipped its wings short, unfortunately, but if you haven't had the chance to see it, I'll talk about some of the great things I found in this movie. This movie is an exciting 1 hour and 45-minute ride. While the plot is kind of simple, it's engaging, and it's really cool to see the after effects of the Joker and Harley breakup and how she's being chased around and she no longer has that protection anymore. It makes for a pretty cool, simple plot, but I wish that Jared Leto made an appearance in this movie because it would have had more continuity. The action scenes of this movie were shot by the director of the John Wick series. You could really see that influence from the movies here, and it really makes this movie a thrill to watch. This movie also has a unique visual aesthetic. It's like a more tame design of what the original Suicide Squad was going for. It works out great because there's so many cool costumes that Harley, the rest of the characters in the movie have. Another way this movie sets itself apart is by beginning with an animation of catching us up on the Joker and Harley relationship. DC has always been on their A game with animation. It was a real treat to see. Unfortunately, I think the ending of the movie is kinda meh. That is because the birds of prey themselves, which I would count as a negative for this movie, unfortunately. They don't have much development, and if they were removed, except for, of course, Cassandra, who has the diamond that Black Mask is trying to get, it wouldn't change anything at all, really. However, Black Mask himself, while different than other things we've seen of him before, Ewan McGregor really brings a threatening presence to him, especially with the scary scene where he's peeling people's faces off. He's really eccentric, and it sucks the way he had to go out because I think he would have fit well in other DC properties. Zaz, on the other hand, was a disappointment. This movie, it's really overlooked for a comic book movie, and it's a lot of fun. I would say most of the jokes hit, and the visual flair and the non-stop action that this movie has really keeps you engaged every second of it. Earning the number 5 spot very deservedly is Man of Steel. The project had a lot to juggle on its hands, with introducing us to a new universe, as well as introducing the newer generation to Superman. And I will say that it juggles these two things pretty well. Our new and current Superman, Henry Cavill, is one of the most perfect castings I've ever seen for a movie character. I mean, the guy looks like he's just straight out of a comic. The beginning and middle of the story are spent up by Lois tracking Clark's basically these guardian angel moments that he has throughout various locations in the world. And I thought that was really cool because when they show us the flashbacks of his origin in Kansas, we kind of see where he got these values of the person that he would become later on. And these moments that they show him with his parents growing up on the farm, very emotional. But one of my biggest issue with this movie is that I feel like there weren't enough of those moments for a Superman movie. And it could feel a little bit soulless at times, especially towards the end of it. On the other hand, its biggest plus is just the pure raw spectacle that you get out of these big moments of the movie. And it just looks visually pleasing. The fight scenes in this movie, I mean, I haven't seen anything like this in any other movie. It's insane. They're just breaking buildings like it's nothing. And I think it really works because the main villain, Zod, who I think is the best out of the whole DCEU, he works really well in this movie. I think he has a great understandable motive, and I think they did a great job of relating him to Clark because he has to deal with his internal struggle of being basically an alien raised with human values versus this crazy alien who wants to destroy his new home. And that's definitely a great thing about the Superman interpretation, is that they really make you feel that he's an alien. I mean, they show Krypton at the beginning of the movie, and they really show how his powers affected him negatively when he was like a little kid. It's really great to see in the movie, and it adds a sense of, realism. This movie definitely had a tough job on its plate, with the other things outside the movie considered, but I think this movie is aged pretty well for being almost 10 years old, and you will not see fight scenes like this in any other movie, as well as, some heartwarming moments that they show in his childhood. This is definitely one of the best movies in the DCEU. At number 4 is Shazam, a certified Christmas classic. And while it's a Christmas movie, this movie could obviously be enjoyed at any time of year. But if I had to bet on any of these movies aging the best, I would say that this one has the best chance. It has a timeless 80s quality and charm that keeps you engaged with a humorous setting. This film's got quite a bit of lore, but the way that it's added into it doesn't bore you, but instead puts you right into the shoes of our main character Billy. And you really get a feeling that you're going what the character's going through, and that you get to live the awesome dream that he has of, being this superhero anytime he wants to. Dr. Savannah is also a nice foil villain for Shazam, and it's nice how they show basically like a darker mirror origin story for him that you could contrast with Shazam's that we see in this movie. My only complaint is that the actor, I feel, Mark Strong, he's underrated, and I feel like he's a bit underused in the role. But overall, he is a pretty good villain in here. The Shazam family that we're also introduced to adds a very nice emotional side to this movie. And you really feel like Billy has found his family. And it's a great character arc that he goes through throughout this movie. But the only problem I really got with Billy's character is that he is really cynical. But when he turns into Shazam, he's a lot more joyous and ecstatic. And I don't think it really translates that well, and I hope they fix that a bit in the sequel, especially since he's gone through a lot of development in this movie. Shazam's a really funny movie that has a lot of passion and heart poured into it. The more I talk about it, I think the more I like it. Number 3 is The Suicide Squad. This movie definitely earns the right to this title more than the previous installment, and I also had to mention that it is an unpredictable ride, and you see that in about the first 10 minutes. But right off the bat, probably the most polarizing aspect of this movie is the comedy and humor. And if you don't like it, I don't think you'll really like this movie at all. But if you do, this is a really hilarious movie. And mostly all of the jokes landed for me except maybe a couple. This movie has a pretty distinct visual flair from the others. It uses gore in some interesting ways with that, I'd say, iconic King Shark shot, as well as when they put the Warner Bros. Presents with one of the deceased characters. I thought that was very clever. There's quite a few villains when it comes down to this movie, and the main one we get Starro, even though they don't even really speak that much. I think they literally have like one line in the whole movie. It actually makes us feel a bit sympathetic when we see what the alien went through. And spoiler alert, but John Cena as Peacemaker as the secondary villain, he gives a career best performance in this movie. And I never thought he could be like unironically threatening in the movie before. It's pretty sick to see. This movie, instead of the last one, infamously using a bunch of, random hit songs over the years, has an indie rock aesthetic to the soundtrack, and I think it works very well. And it sounds like it was personally catered to this film. James Gunn once again shows that he can make a great superhero team-up movie, and not just that, but a great superhero team-up movie with unknown characters that we don't really care about before seeing the movie and making us have an emotional attachment to them. It keeps you on your toes the whole time on who's going to survive and make it out of the movie. But if you haven't already watched it, it's a banger and you're definitely missing out. For the runner-up spot, it's Wonder Woman. It's a wonderful origin story that also contains within it a great love story between Wonder Woman and Steve Trevor, which is a great thing that they put in the sequel. While I think child flashbacks are really overused for these types of movies, I think it worked very well and to the benefit of this movie because it expands the world and we kind of see how Diana's naivety came to come. And although the final battle is a bit generic, with Ares showing up and having a huge CGI fight instead of Steve telling her that, hey, these wars happen for a reason, this is how it is. They definitely could have found a better way to actually use the words that he said to make a better ending to this movie. But the journey that she is on tells a very nice story of how through the crew that she goes on the war with, she learns a bit more about how humans live, as well as just through Steve Trevor. We get the return of Wonder Woman's iconic theme song in this movie, as well as having some great action scenes. Especially, I'm talking about the No Man's Land scene, which I think is really up there with, like, say, the Avengers Assemble scene from the Avengers movie. This film is very compact. It introduces us to the world of the Amazons, which is very interesting. And whenever I watch this movie, it just flies by. I have such a great time with it, and the charming performance from Gal Gadot really makes this I would say, the best origin movie in the DCEU. The best DCEU movie is, no surprise, the Snyder Cut. I'm not going to talk about how this movie came to be, even though the real life story of how it came to be is so good. And I'll probably link a video down in the description for you to see if you want to know more about it. I mean, it's just really insane to think about also how Justice League still to this day is considered one of the worst comic book movies. And this is considered a pretty spectacular one. The 4-hour runtime was one of the biggest draws for this movie, and in some ways I feel that it's good because it really expands the DC universe, and it does not feel like it at all. I mean, it feels like 2 hours and a half. But there are some scenes that could have been cut from it, such as I think she was from Iceland, the Icelandic girl singing, that was really unnecessary. It uses this longer runtime to actually develop characters that were kind of shafted in Justice League, such as Cyborg, who was barely a character in that movie, and in this one, he has a lot of great moments, especially him and Ezra Miller's Flash, who basically get these two back-to-back epic moments, and these epic moments are earned because of the way that they develop their relationships with their fathers. We could really feel that pain that Cyborg has and that resentment that he has towards his father because of the tragic accident that happens. It's really beautiful in the way that, Cyborg's father teaches him to use his new abilities as gifts, especially in the scene where he's giving money to the woman in need. It's very touching. As well as the moment at the end of the movie where he says, "I'm not broken." It's just so powerful, and this is such a major improvement from his character in Justice League. Ezra Miller's Flash also gets a major improvement as well, in the way that he has an arc where he doesn't really feel like he's moving forward in life, and the "at the speed of force" moment is one of my favorite comic book movie scenes of all time. It is just done so well, especially with Junkie XL's score playing in the background with the thumping instrumental. It's just really beautiful. Everyone really gets their time to shine in this movie, which I really love, especially his villain Steppenwolf. He actually has a great motive this time. and he's a slave who's trying to restore the honor that he lost in his planet of apocalypse. You could really feel that guilt and shame that the voice actor, as well as I'd say the CG, presents in the movie. The pacing is very excellent in this movie, and I would even say it's better to a movie that's similar to this, and it's better than the first Avengers pacing. There are action scenes that keep you engaged throughout the movie. They're pretty long, which I do enjoy. Lastly, there's some pretty nice character appearances that you won't find in Justice League, such as Willem Dafoe's Volca returning from Aquaman, Jared Leto's Joker, who I actually think is very well done in this movie, at least with this version of Batman. And lastly, Martian Manhunter makes an appearance, and I think he is pretty well in the role. And you can't forget Darkseid, who finally makes his overdue big screen debut. After a 4-year wait, we finally got this movie. It was an incredible journey to get it with the fan support that got us to watch this movie in the first place, as well as that we finally have an awesome Justice League movie, which is so great to have. Even if you're a little turned back by, Snyder's vision of these DC movies, I think there's a lot to enjoy in this one, and this is one of the best films he's ever made. Again, it has so much epic moments and fight scenes. It has character moments that stand out for almost the whole cast. And I think that this is one of the best comic book movies we've gotten in recent years. Hey everyone, I hope you really liked that video. Don't worry, there'll still be longer videos like this, but I will be experimenting with some shorter ones that will be coming in the near future. So stay tuned, and I'll see y'all. Bye.